Welcome to the Speechaus channel. I'm Dr. Sarah Lobigaiga de Rodriguez, and today we will be talking about the key features of a unique accent that most people around the world are struggling to understand or even produce, that being my accent, the Australian English accent. Speechaus is Australia's leading pronunciation advocacy, clarification and fluency centre. So if you just want to engage in conversations more confidently so that your pronunciation is no longer a barrier to your career or social life, you're in the right place. Now, we work with clients all over the world, starting from Australia out to elsewhere. We bring speech training to your house, so don't hesitate to get in contact with us if you'd like to learn more about our services. I've also left some links in the description box below with some resources, how to reach us and where to begin, so be sure to check it out. Today, we're talking about the challenge of standard Australian English. I'm delighted to speak to you about this. In fact, I was interviewed for a news article that ended up going into a feature, Chapter 1 of this book called Explain That, interviewed by journalist Carl Quinn for the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, and we discussed where did the Australian accent come from. I really recommend this book. It's a great one if you're wanting to read some fact-checked articles about all sorts of topics, but the interview around Australian English and the summary that Carl provided as a result of our discussion is fascinating. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. That article is also available online, so I've linked that in the description box below as well for you. At Speechaus, our team of speech pathologists assists you to apply the features of your desired pronunciation patterns with a core focus on advocacy. We acknowledge that no accent is superior to another. However, some speakers benefit from calibrating the maneuvers of the mouth, the lips, the jaw, and the tongue to achieve comfort and flow while communicating. Today, we'll be discussing what makes Australians sound Australian using a phonetics and speech pathology approach. However, I'm aware after meeting hundreds, actually thousands of clients from all over the world, starting with diverse and varied languages as their first language, coming into learning English pronunciation sounds to tighten their professional speaking, that sometimes you need some resources and advocacy to make you feel confident in your identity no matter your language background. So for this purpose, I would like to share with you a few resources. If you're looking at working on your communication for your career path, you should check out Cadenza, my corporate communication consulting business. You can find that linked below. But in particular, I'd like to draw your attention to a useful tool that will serve as an advocacy stance for your confidence. So head to the Cadenza website where we have for you a position statement on racial and linguistic diversity, the right for that. Racism is more than just words, beliefs, and actions. It includes all the barriers that prevent people from enjoying dignity and equality because of their race or language background. So on this page, you can find a tool that will build up your speaking identity and confidence when using English. It's called the Speaking Comfort Manifesto. Get your hands on it if you're feeling sidelined, small, or discriminated against due to your pronunciation currently when speaking English. Before we get into our heavy tutorial on Australian English, I would also encourage you to head to the Speechaus Clinic website. So here we are on the Speechaus Clinic webpage. If you're looking for help with your English pronunciation, simply click this button. You can learn more about our programs and how they'll work for you. Remember, we're worldwide. You might also like to check our services page. We have a variety of different services that may be well suited for your communication from a clinical perspective. And lastly, I want to draw your attention to our tips page, where you can find a lot of different articles around pronunciation advocacy and your communication. We have some great guides on clear English pronunciation strategies for doctors and medical professionals. You can even pick up a resource over on that page for your pronunciation when navigating difficult medical words. We also have a lot of other articles around strategies for how to improve your pronunciation from your own home country without buying a plane ticket, living abroad, or changing time zones. There you can find a lot lot of tools. You can also pick up a complete guide on Australian English pronunciation sounds, complete with audio. So be sure to check out our website for more tools before we get into the tutorial. I'm sure you're curious, what is it about the Australian English accent that sounds so different and distinct? Well, the Australian accent is a distinct accent produced by native English speakers in Australia. It's a tough accent to replicate, even for actors in Hollywood. We hear time and again people kind of getting some of those sound patterns out of alignment. Now, at Speechaus, we assist internationals to learn core features of the Australian accent, but we also work in training English pronunciation for neutral international speech patterns. We can assist you if you want a general American or a British received pronunciation, modern received pronunciation. We use Phonetics, which lets us unlock for you the sound codes of all of those variations of English pronunciation. I've even worked with a German client to train them in a Miami accent. Anything is possible around the strategies, provided that we apply the pattern, the phonetic code required, and train you in how your speech machine moves, the muscles of the tongue, lips, jaw, and so forth, to create the target sounds and approach nearness to your overall goal. Clients who choose to alter their English pronunciation may at times want to opt for a fixed accent as the model they aim towards. At Speechaus, we can assist you to increase your communication ease and pronunciation consistency, but we are aware that everyone's preference is different. How you speak and sound is a personal thing. In my experience, I've met many speakers who wish to incorporate some flair of the local Australian pronunciation features in their speech patterns. I've also met some Europeans and individuals from other parts of the world who've wanted to inflect a unique quality to their pronunciation in that they emulate the Australian accent. They're wanting to choose it as something that they apply to their day-to-day career communication to add an Australian flair to their interaction. You are open to choice in the patterns you take with how you pronounce English if it's your second language. So if you're looking at strategies and approaches and maybe weighing up what would be the speech patterns you want to align your speaking with more closely, we can assist you by providing you with information on what you might like to add in and how to do it. Now, other speakers I work with may want to sound more intelligible but neutral. We can also assist you. Australian pronunciation is one of the many speech pronunciation codes we can follow if you wish to work on your pronunciation, but it's not the only way. You can read more about what features you can work with us to incorporate on around the Australian English rules in your pronunciation, so feel free to check that on the website. We've got a lot of content about that. So what is it that makes Australians sound Australian? There has been some research into the features that define mainstream Australian English speech patterns. While Australia has a mix of cultures and language groups, all of which can be seen as Australian, the speech patterns of what we term mainstream Australian English refer to the dominant dialect used by a vast majority of speakers, those who are typically born in Australia or who migrate at an early age. This is according to Cox and Palathorpe in their article of 2007. So I'm guessing you're wondering what would be the best way to describe the Australian accent. Describing the sounds and rules of accents of the world is best done using the International Phonetic Alphabet, the IPA. Now, because we've been working in this area for over 12 years training pronunciation, first as Voice Science and now Speechaus, we're about to celebrate our 1-year anniversary after rebranding from Voice Science to Speechaus. We're looking at over a decade of work in training individuals to learn phonetics who are not speech pathologists. They're coming from all walks of life and professionals. Given that we've worked in this area a lot, we have a lot of content and strategies and ideas for you that I'd like to share. So over on our website, you can find a really interesting article termed Phonetics, 10 Signs That You Need Phonetics in Your Life. Be sure to check that out. The phonetic alphabet provides a code for specific sounds of all languages in the world. Referred to fondly as the IPA, this alphabet provides a code for English pronunciation or whichever other accent you want to work on. And we use this pronunciation code to train our clients so that they learn how to use phonetics to create the pronunciation features of their desired speech patterns. Now, you probably saw as I was scrolling through the website earlier on in this tutorial that we do have a resource called Standard Australian English Sounds. I recommend you pick this up because in this resource guide, you're going to learn some foundational information about how to build up your command of phonetics to be really efficient with your pronunciation training and goals. And in this workbook, we also include a complete outline of the phonetics for Standard Australian English. I've dropped a link for where you can pick up that guide in the description box below. So all you need to do to opt into that one is head to the link I've dropped, pop your name in and your surname, click Get It Now, and you'll receive an email that you confirm, upon which you'll receive the audio guide to listen to, as well as a PDF with tips and instructions. That's a bonus that we've prepared for you. What do you think of when you think of Australia? Maybe you're thinking of our ochre sand or the bright blue sea. These are the colours behind Speechaus. We've branded our clinic as an internationally accessible clinic, but in the hues and tones of what we see in the Australian environment. Now take a moment and think, what do you think of when you picture or try to recall the sonic quality of a classic Australian accent? So I'm sure there's certain sounds that stand out to you. Let's get into one of those features and give it a name so that you've got a sense of what the sound-based patterns you're hearing relate to. In this blog post, we provide a lot of info about the core features, and the first area I want to get into is the notion of broadness. In the past, the Australian accent has been described in terms of how broad it is on a continuum of broadness to cultivated. You might like to think of that as a plane on which we have broad, that's a traditional term, through to, let me just get myself out of the way, cultivated. Now, according to where you sit on this plane with your pronunciation choices or innate way of speaking Australian English, there are certain sound-based and rhythm-based features that you will use according to where you sit on the plane. These days, however, it's interesting to note that research indicates that the extremes across the continuum are narrowing inwards. So we're getting a lot more of a homogeneous sound among the Australian speakers. In this tutorial, as we talk through the consonants and the vowels and rhythm and intonation and voice tone features, we'll be making reference to broad versus cultivated, and I'll provide you with some key parameters that are noteworthy. Our first point of discussion relates to the area of consonants. Consonants would be the first layer that we addressed in training your English pronunciation clarity and flow. Australian English has many consonants. We overlap with the consonants of General American and British English. There are some subtle nuances, and indeed it's how Australian native speakers use the consonants. Although we share the same consonants as all the other English speakers, it's how we use them that counts. So let's look at a few rules that you can characterize when you apply an Australian accent inflection. Principle number 1 is that the Australian accent is an accent that we refer to as non-rhotic for the most part. So this means that the pronunciation of the sound will never typically occur at the end of words. Now, when it comes to the letter we obviously write it like this. That would be our alphabet spelling. And then it's easy enough because when we use it phonetically, we write it with the same character, and that would be our phonetic spelling. The only difference would be that this is in the bracket. That would denote that we need phonetics. So now let's consider how Australian English is typically non-rhotic. So where a North American will say 3 separate sounds for a word like car, so there's our English spelling, and that would convert to phonetically car, so the will always be pronounced. Let's put a note there, North American. Australian speakers obviously will write the word the same, but pronounce it differently, omitting the sound, and in place of that, lengthening the vowel preceding the letter in the spelling. So we get North American car versus Australian English car. This is a key feature that only occasionally has some subtle exceptions. When we're linking words, we do get some inflection as we link two words closely together. We even use the when we don't have the letter there. That's something that we would definitely train you in. But let's take a look at a quick example. So we may have the phrase something like, the car is running. Now, at the liaison between the car to is, many Australian speakers will do this phonetically. So although we're non-rhotic, we will do things like the car is. You might be surprised to know this sound here is a z. So the car is running. But that would sound very differently from how an American speaker would deal with the letter So this would be Australian. Let's look at American, North American, I should say. So a North American would go, the car is. I'm muddling phonetics with spelling. So we still have the same cluster, but what we do is we keep the at the front word. So that would be phonetically car is. Here we don't get a link. The is received on the final sound of the first word. It appends itself to the front of the phrase where we get a clean break between the vowel that follows typically. Now this example is an example where the speaker is linking words together closely and fluently. Australian speakers of mainstream Australian English, standardized Australian English, don't tend to inflect the sound if a word is not linking in this context. However, that is emerging among certain generational speakers. There's a subtle nuance with newer generations, or those who are exposed to quite a lot of international English. We can start to hear a subtle inflection. It's not uncommon to find it, although mainstream typically would not have at the end of a word in this context, as we would hear in a North American speaker. In Australian English, we also often insert an sound when linking two words together if there are two vowel sounds next to each other. This is pretty complex, and I'd love to show you this in sessions, but we call this the intrusive or apenthic As a result, you may be able to at times hear the falling between two words that don't contain the letter For example, a word connecting saw to it might sound like saw it, where you hear a quality there. But that's something we can show you. It's quite detailed. There's certain incidences where you don't want to do that, and we'll help you in a bespoke manner to learn exactly what you should do in these word boundary markers. Our English pronunciation training programs assist you with this rule if you'd like to incorporate it into your speech patterns. Indeed, integrating this approach with linking tends to increase the flow and efficiency of your pronunciation, as it will allow you to move between words quicker with more coordination so you can focus on your ideas rather than speech mechanics. Okay, now it's time to get into another pronunciation target, and that is the pronunciation of the T sound. So when we come into pronouncing the letter T in words, here is when we want to really consider where are we speaking on this plane from broad through to cultivated. So the more cultivated the accent, the more the listener will hear the receipt of T in almost all positions of the word. So a cultivated accent will be very heavy on registration of t, t, t at the beginning, middle, and end of words. Articulation of an explosive t without voice vibration 100% of the time, however, will not create natural speech patterns for Australian English. Indeed, even what's noted as a very biased phrase, but a well-spoken Australian native speaker will show some pronunciation variations when it comes to T. So let's take a look at what your classic cultivated accent would move towards more often than not. Of course, we would have the sound pronounced at the front of a word, like to. In the middle of the word, we will more often get it. So let's find a word. The word is rhetoric. So your cultivated speaker would pronounce the T with a very strong explosion. Rhetoric. And we can even add some additional fine print details to the phonetics. This is something that speech pathologists use often. We call them diacritics. They're super or superscript that adds additional coded based information about what the sound is doing mechanically with the tongue and the voice and so forth. So we would have what we call an aspirated T, has a lot of airstream pressure. And then let's consider at the end of words. So if we had a word like it, that's a great one, we would receive full air pressure T in pronunciation of that word for our classic cultivated pattern. Now, many Australians will show instances where the T sound is deleted or flapped. So let's look at T-deletion. Australian speakers are likely to delete the T sound at the end of words, rather like speakers with a North American accent. When the T sound is deleted, a glottal stop is inserted in its place. And the more it happens, the more the speech features would approach that classic older term, broad Australian English. So let's take a look at the word it. That's a great example. So for your old school broad accent, we would be hearing something that sounds like this. I'll write it phonetically as I say it for you. So the word is it, but broad receipt of that sound would be more like it, where the T is deleted, and in the place of T, we get this symbol, the glottal stop. Now, this can be a difficult feature to add if English is your second language, and it's recommended that a speech pathologist assists you in including this sound, as it's produced deep in the voice box with air pressure, and if created incorrectly, it can cause some voice inflammation, or it can just sound quite peculiar and idiosyncratic outside of what you're aiming for. Now it's time to talk about T flapping. The Australian accent also features flapping. This is a phonetic pattern where the T is softened in the middle of words, even sometimes at the end of words when we link. And when the sound is flapped, it will sound a lot more like a soft D sound or a very light European R sound. So let's take an example. Our word could be a word like letter. So when it is flapped, let's shift that down a little bit. So T flapping. When it is flapped, we will hear it as this. Letter, or if the speaker uses a schwa, letter. That's flapping, but typically for cultivated Australian English, we'll have less flapping. It doesn't mean you're uncivilized if you flap the T, because this is really a very biased way of considering pronunciation. The way we speak should be no reflection of our IQ or how civilized we are, but that classic term, cultivated Australian English, which is really archaic and an unnecessary fossil, I think, because of the bias it implies, we would instead hear nil or minimal flapping in the same context that we've discussed. So a word like letter would be received as letter, especially likely to have a schwa, thus very much approximating the pronunciation pattern of something very similar to a UK received pronunciation. So I mentioned that native speakers flap the T, and it usually results in a vowel shift at the end of the word. Flapping is also present in the general American accent. So if you're wanting to work on flapping, take care, because you've got to do the right thing by the vowels around the pattern. We can assist you with that in a bespoke, personalized manner. I'd be delighted to show you how it all works for you. Our third feature is what we do when it comes to this very specific sound. It's actually two sounds phonetically called the yod. So we don't yod drop. Let's take a look at the yod phonetically. The yod is a combination of a semivowel, a glide, y. We write it phonetically like this, but you can think of it as the sound you hear in words like you, plus a long backed vowel, oo. Together, the yod actually sounds like pronouncing the word you, not you, correctly. When an Australian native speaker pronounces words that contain a consonant letter plus the letter U, let's take a look. For example, we might have words like music or Tuesday. The Australian speaker will insert a yod. A yod refers to that phonetic combination. So we have these two sounds being placed within the word. All right, let's write the phonetics in Speechaus Blue. Mu. And yes, it is a z. If you're not sure why, we will show you why. Music. So here, do you see it? There is our yod. Let's write the next word. Chew. And yes, it is a z sound there. If you're not sure why, we will show you how in your program. Tuesday. And there is our yod hanging out. This is drastically different from American English speech patterns. So we will show you how to bring your speech patterns closer to the local pronunciation rules of English if you so choose. That is your choice. No one's going to pressure you. First and foremost, we will advocate for you to speak as you wish and feel. You should check out your personalized English pronunciation audit by Speechaus. Not only will I help you identify the one thing holding you back from clear and confident communication, I will also meet with you no matter where you are. We work globally to provide strategic recommendations. And then every team member on our team who will then train you with the target sounds you need to work on is a bilingual speech pathologist so that you'll feel understood like nowhere else. You can check that audit out in the description box below. I think you'll find our sessions inspiring, affirming, and supportive for your speaking interactions and English confidence. Great, it's time for one of the most noteworthy differences with Australian English, and that is the diphthongs. Diphthongs is a tricky word to say, and it is actually one of the harder things to do when it comes to Australian English. We hear many timing differences on vowels when we hear Australian diphthongs. Diphthongs are present in many languages and are created when two vowels occur side by side on the same syllable. The way you move from the first vowel to the second will determine how close your pronunciation is in terms of reaching that standardized mainstream stereotypical Australian English. So this is defined by how long the first vowel is in relation to the second vowel, and also how accurately you shape your mouth and coordinate the individual sounds as you link them. Words that will sound distinctly Australian are usually those where we hear a diphthong fall. These are often the hardest to pronounce accurately for internationals, especially speakers of languages that have a small number of vowels, often as few as 5 to 10. For example, Italian, Spanish, Greek, Thai, Vietnamese. A lot of these languages are limited. We just have a, e, I, o, u in terms of vowel diversity, not limited by any other sense of the word. So this can make it quite challenging to apply two vowels next to each other with the duration features that we're aiming for in Australian standard speech. Now, the Italian pronunciation does contain diphthongs, and we do have diphthongs in many of the other languages that have these core a, e, I, o, u options, but it's the nuance with the rhythm and the timing and the musicality behind the inflection on the vowels that creates this really distinct idiosyncratic Aussie sound. If you're curious to see the vowels that are diphthongs in Australian English, here's how you can do it. Download this resource. I do some reading of the target sounds so that you can get a sense of what are they. It won't inflect those sounds in your day-to-day spontaneous conversations, but it doesn't hurt to take a listen to hear what the diphthongs sound like. So when you get that resource, let me show you where the diphthongs are. They are essentially these sounds here. As you see, you've got two vowels in alignment with each other. They're your diphthongs. But now it's time to talk about the monophthongs. So the monophthongs take up this section. They're your mono, and these are your diphthong. No surprise, monophthongs, just like monocycle or monobrow, are single vowels. Of all accents of English, mainstream Australian English is one of the most expansive in terms of vowel sounds. Where general American accent has a total of 16 vowels, received pronunciation and mainstream Australian English both hit a total of usually up to 20. Now, discussion is out among many researchers about what vowels the mainstream Australian accent has. It's a stereotype, so I don't think we need to be so categorical, but most researchers will agree 20. While there are some similarities between British and Australian vowels, there are also many noticeable differences, obviously, and the timing of Australian vowels is one of the most important features. Although Australian native speakers share many of the vowels of both British and American English, the duration of the vowel and the mouth shaping can differ significantly. For the most part, the vowel symbols that you see when you refer to English pronunciation overlap. We write the same symbols for American English as we do for British received pronunciation, South African, New Zealand English, as we do for Australian English, but the nuance beneath the sound at the diacritic fine transcription level relates to how the speech machine is using its parts idiosyncratically when pronouncing. If you've been considering English pronunciation, no matter the variant, you've probably uncovered that long vowels are important. So now it's time to discuss long vowels in Australia. Long vowels are longer in duration than many other English accents. In fact, probably longer than any accent you've ever heard. It's a bit like your uncle telling the fishing story about how long the fish was that they caught. And the broader the accent, typically the longer the vowel. We have spent so much time on vowels. That's not all. We've done our consonants, we've done our vowels. Now it's time to get into one of my favorite areas. As an opera singer, as well as a speech pathologist and executive coach, we need to talk about the voice and Australian English. I've prepared for you a nice summary overview. Well, I think it's nice. I hope you do too. On the voice resonance features of Australian English. You can find that in the article linked below if you want to refer back to it later. But let's discuss the lay of the land as it relates to your vocal folds and Aussie English. Australian English often contains higher levels of nasal resonance to oral resonance. And yes, the way the voice works when communicating in language is a feature of voice vibration. Now let's first consider what is resonance. Well, resonance refers to voice acoustics, and it's determined by where the bulk of the sound vibration created in your voice is reinforced in your face. Among Australian native speakers, there is a tendency for vowels to be articulated with high energy spectrum in the mouth, as well as the nasal passageways, you might have noticed. Now, this is what creates a distinct form of voicing that makes Australian speakers sound very different from BBC presenters, who typically have higher ratios of oral, internal mouth-based sound wave release. Now, not all clients at Speechaus choose to alter their voice resonance features when working to improve their English pronunciation flow and comfort. And we don't recommend trying to change how your voice sounds by yourself. Without the support of a vocal coach or therapist, you can get yourself into trouble if sounds are made unhealthily in the throat. This is one of the areas that our team really excel in. When we work with you on your Australian pronunciation training, we'll be monitoring your vocal health carefully so you can speak with good projection and comfort. Maybe at this point in the tutorial, you've enjoyed learning some interesting insights about the Australian accent. Possibly you're curious as to whether you can get an Australian accent as your overall speaking goal. While drill-based training works to enhance a client's production of sound targets, in most cases, adults are unable to realign their speech mechanism to new patterns of production with 100% accuracy and minimal conscious control on monitoring. So we need to talk about typical and realistic outcomes you might expect from a pronunciation program. So you may receive gains in increased speech rhythm accuracy, increased intelligibility, overall consonant clarity, and heightened vowel accuracy. Obtaining a consistent target accent profile is contingent upon each syllable of a word receiving the required sound up to spontaneous speech level tasks. Given the rate of speech for a typical adult rests between 160 to 220 syllables per minute, the frequency of sound variation cannot be realistically perfected in an adult to the level of 100% accuracy, especially without conscious control. So our programs at Speechaus take into account this fact and are designed to provide you with the information needed about how sounds of English are formed so you can work to increase your consistency and clarity when pronouncing English. Now, obviously, there are many more features that we are so excited to show you if you want to opt for improving your English pronunciation that follows the rules of Australian English or another rule. I would encourage you to enroll in your English pronunciation assessment now to get started. At Speechaus, our purpose is to deliver empathetic, innovative, and accessible speech therapy through all of Australia and worldwide that empowers your speaking interactions, eliminates barriers, and addresses your personal communication goals. We value advocacy. We will advocate for everyone's right to be heard, irrespective of their communication barriers, identity, diagnosis, geographic location, language background, or social status. Since our time on Earth is limited, we believe that all experiences, especially clinical therapy experiences, should balance challenges with enjoyment. We are agile and strive to create engaging experiences for your communication and speaking goals that are more likely to stimulate concrete outcomes. We empower your speaking. We believe that focusing on building strengths, even in the face of communication barriers, disadvantage, or bias, is the only way to transform lives. If you would like to optimize and calibrate your speech machine for English clarity, the Speechaus Personalized Pronunciation Audit is the best place to start. Our clinicians, myself included, meticulously analyze how your articulators currently produce English sounds to identify your clarity and flow barriers. You'll then learn precisely how to place your articulators in a one-on-one pronunciation program. Are you ready for a well-oiled speech machine? Everyone experiences speaking stress in specific environments, but with the right training, they can speak up with clarity and impact. If you're keen to work on your professional communication, you should also subscribe to my other channel, Cadenza. It's your best playground for elite communication. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, ask any questions in the comments, and turn notifications on, ready for our next one. Ciao for now.